this is the Office of Registrar of Political Parties, and together with me, allow me to ask the people I'm with to introduce themselves.
Just mention their names, please.
Yeah.
To save time here.
Thank you. Together with me, I have Assistant Registrar, Mr. Ali, then Assistant Registrar, Florence Bilia, our Head of Legal, Wafula Wakoko, and our Director, Compliance, Daniel Kinuthia. Thank you so much. We have given to you 2 documents, but we want to concentrate on the executive summary because in the interest of time for the proposals. So you have the document written Office of the Registrar, Submission to National Dialogue Committee, Executive Summary. Then we have the other bigger document, which is about 10 pages or so.
But maximum of 20 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. The Office of Registrar is an independent state office created under the meaning of Article 260 of the Constitution of Kenya and established through the Political Parties Act with a mandate to register political parties, regulate all activities of political parties, and also administer political parties fund. In this particular presentation, we have picked the issues that were put out for discussion, and in the executive summary, we have pushed the entrenching of funds into the Constitution, and our concentration will be on political parties fund, the fidelity to political parties, coalition and the law, then establishment and entrenchment of state offices, then electoral justice and related matters, and other outstanding constitutional issues, specifically implementation of 2-thirds gender rule. We shall comment on those matters. The first one is the issue of political parties fund. As we all know, political parties fund is established in the Constitution, but the percentage of the political parties, 0.3%, is established under political parties fund. Our proposal is that the 0.3% established under the Act should find its way into the Constitution to make sure that the political parties fund is reinforced in terms of how much money should come to political parties. It is noted that Section 24 of the PPA has never been realized to the full, the 0.3%. So that's why we thought it is important to be put in the Constitution so that we can reinvest and realize the 0.3. And we joined this by, there's a proposal in the President's memorandum and also in the mandate of this committee about women inclusion and political parties participation fund, which a proposal is that it get hived from the political parties fund as it is. Well, we have no objection. We note that unless we realize the 0.3%, then there will be a lot of effect on the operations of political parties if money is hived from the fund as it is now. It will be so little and so insignificant in terms of meeting the objections, even to support what is being proposed. And we also propose that the same should be managed under one act and under one office, which is the Office of Registrar of Political Parties. We also propose in terms of the political parties fund, just like it's done in other jurisdictions and specifically Europe, we find when countries and states are funding political parties, they also introduce as a criteria to match a shilling for political parties. What we mean by that is that political parties are obligated also to fundraise and get money from their members so that the state can match that. Meaning that political parties will not only wait for what comes from the state, political parties will be moved out there and fundraise and also activate their members to do what is required. The other matter we wanted to submit on is the issue of the second issue on electoral system. It is our proposal, and we have been considering our other submission at the BBI, that we need to adopt a mixed member electoral system as opposed to first past the post system, so as to avoid wastefulness of the votes and ensure representation of the marginalized groups. We proposed to ensure inclusivity and strengthening also of political parties. Therefore, we are proposing a hybrid system, first past the post and proportional representation. In this system, we are saying while we retain the single member constituencies and the county seats, the regional clusters or special seats are created where voters are asked to vote for political parties, and of course, lists that shall be submitted by political parties. These special seats are then taken and filled proportionately based on the number of votes garnered by each party. The mixed member representation system would strengthen, first of all, political parties, because political parties, even the ones that are not so big and they may not have enough seats, then they can get into parliament through the party list that have been voted for during the elections. And we also, then that will call for doing away with the closed party list, so that we do party list after elections, after they have been voted for. And it also ensure participation of voters in how party lists are made. And we are suggesting in the alternative, if that does not happen, the system does not change, there is need for participation of either members of political parties or voters in making of the party list, as opposed to just selecting people to go into party list. And our proposal is that the party list may be developed through members of the party voting, and preferably through a delegate system. This will ensure meaningful participation by political party members, and it should be close to political party members. Then number 5, on the matter of political parties, strengthening political parties, and we are proposing commitment of the political class to the political parties' code of conduct and their party policy documents, including their party constitution. We note that the code regulates the behavior of the members and supporters of political parties to promote good governance and eradicate political malpractice. However, as opposed to many other code of conduct, we have a political parties code of conduct that have no sanctions. And therefore, we are proposing that the political party code of conduct should have sanction beyond the only one sanction given, which is the registration of a political party, which is a lengthy process. It cannot address the immediate issues when they arise, especially during an electoral process. So we are proposing that the sanctions be brought in the political parties code of conduct, so that we facilitate enforcement and ensure that there is effectiveness in compliance. It is also noted that under the Elections Act, for example, the Electoral Code of Conduct has sanctioned and it is enforced. Therefore, there is need for the political class and also to enhance the Act and to respect the political class, to respect and adhere to the party constitution and the Code of Conduct. And I note as an explanation also that sometimes even the parties themselves may not have control on what their members say out there. So the sanctions should actually also be geared towards individuals who make statements or behave in a certain way that sometimes that are not sanctioned even by the party. It's just a person, bad behavior, which should then be regulated through sanctions. The other matter in terms of entrenching of offices, we take cognizance of what the discussions are. And one of the issues we are raising is that for us to strengthen the Office of Registrar of Political Parties, we propose that the office be considered under Chapter 15 of the Constitution as a dependent office under Chapter 15. We also propose increased funding because the mandate is big, but the fund is limited. In regards to establishment of the office of Leader of Opposition to sit in Parliament and to be held by the presidential candidate of the party constitution or coalition that garners the second highest number of votes. We propose that this office be established. But we have one question: what if the candidate, the presidential candidate, is an independent candidate? To us, we propose that it should be a party, not an independent candidate. I don't know what the law will say if the second runners-up is an independent candidate. That's a question probably to put up for us as regulators of political parties. We want to insist that it should be from a political party. In regards to two-third gender rule, the OLPP supports the initiative of the executive on the two-third gender rule by establishing the multi-sectoral committee on gender, where OLPP is represented. We are members of that, so we shall go by the proposals that shall come from that multi-sectoral. However, we say that the establishment of two-third gender rule in the list of candidates for elections should be enforced. There was a ruling in the last general elections to enforce that. It was stopped by court midway, but we think the enforcement should come on board so that for any list of candidates a political party submit to the Electoral Commission, the list of candidates should meet not more than two-thirds of either gender. The next point is that we also propose, as other matters, under electoral justice, institutionalization of psychosocial support of candidates in the post-election phase to address the candidates who lose elections and also those who win. The candidates who lose go through devastating periods, and there's no systems to support the people who participate in election, yet they came out to really support governance and the democratic participation in elections. Then some of them go through very difficult moments. Others go into depression. Others go into situation to financial crisis and all that. At least psychosocial support for those ones. And for the winners, I think they should also be supported how to behave after winning, so that there's a bit of moderation, so that we maintain national unity as far as after elections. Because winning also can be difficult. There are people who may not exactly know what to do with the win. They behave in a different manner. So it is important also to support those ones. So we also, the last point is that ORPP proposes fast-tracking of the reconstitution of IBC in order to avert possible constitutional crisis, as well as address critical, outstanding processes. That is the end of our summary of presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Nderitu, and for that eloquent presentation.
Yeah.
Let me just, okay, sorry. Let me just go, then Waziri will come. This fund, the 0.3%.
Yes.
And I agree with you, if possible, we need to have it entrenched in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Okay? But do you think the non-compliance with this requirement can simply be attributed to the fact that this fund is not entrenched in the Constitution? That's not down.
Yeah.
What would happen even after entrenching it in the Constitution if a rogue government refuses to comply? Yeah, because it's now more than how many years? 10 years or so since this law came into being. And the government has consistently declined to comply with the requirement to disburse these funds, even where the parliament actually appropriates the money. Okay? Okay? But more critically, it is never appropriated. I'm sure you know. Okay? As a result of sailing, so-called, and the money you guys here, you share our budget, and now leader majority. So what has been the reason why this money is not availed? Please help us understand if the cure is only in entrenching it in the Constitution. Finally, on my part, is the ORPP. It's a very critical office, very critical. And in fact, if you ask me, I wouldn't mind having it entrenched in the Constitution. But it must be reminded that its purpose is to protect political parties. Because our democracy is still very young. And most of our parties are vulnerable. So they need to be protected. And the office is at the center of the protection of these parties, and indeed of multi-party democracy. What do you make of the presence of the Political Parties Liaison Committee? Do you think its role so far has been satisfactory? Do you think there are things we can do to have it strengthened? Do you think its structure is proper? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I want to agree with you that we need to consider the entrenchment of that band in the Constitution and the office. Kenya is a multi-party democracy, but as we speak, there's a serious threat to our multi-party democracy. One way of killing multi-party democracy is starving the political parties of funding. And what Honorable Piwanda is talking about has been there. There's been quite some deliberate attempt to not to disburse the funds and therefore not to finance political parties to be effective as vehicles through which Kenya as a country can realize its political aspirations. The second threat to democracy has been the issue of cannibalization of our political parties. There's a deliberate attempt to cannibalize political parties in our country. And the Jubilee Party has been the main target, as you are aware, ODM also, and other opposition parties. And we are not just talking of the opposition, but even in the ruling coalition itself, we know that there are parties like Ford Kenya and ANC that are in danger or that are being arm twisted to collapse into UDA. And we're in danger of actually Kenya going back to a single-party state. Now, what I want to find out is, I've looked at your presentation. I've not seen much on party hopping. And this is where we are finding members of parliament moving to another party without going back to their base or their constituencies for a fresh mandate. And this happened before. There have been proposals here on how that can be dealt with in terms of returning hygiene to our politics. And that political hygiene can come from very clear provisions that if you move from your party, you're elected on this party, on this manifesto. If you are to go to another party, then you should resign and go back to the people for fresh election. What do you say about that and the proposals in amendment of the Political Parties Act to ensure that happens? Thank you.
Thank you, ORPP. I'll just pick up from where Honorable Eugene has ended on the rights of political parties vis-a-vis individual rights. You know, our constitution has been built among the most progressive constitutions, not just in Africa, but in the world. And part of what has made this constitution to be built as the most progressive was Article 4 of the Constitution of the Bill of Rights. I want to draw reference to Article 32 on the freedom of conscience, belief and opinion, where that says that every person has a right, either individually, in community, with others, in public or in private, to manifest any religion, belief, true worship, practice, all that. A person shall not be compelled to act or engage in any act that is contrary to that person's belief or even religion. The same article, Article 4, freedom of association, that every person has the right to freedom of association, which includes the right to form, join, or participate in activities of an association of any kind. That includes political parties. The same constitution, in Article 38, gives Kenyans individually political rights, that you have every citizen is free to make political choices. that vis-a-vis the question of the rights of political parties, which to me are more of corporate rights, what, in your opinion, ORPP constitutionally has a higher ranking? Is it individual political rights for me as an individual, that I have the right to associate with whoever I want to associate? Or is it the question that has been spoken to as political sanity within political parties? Can I be forced to leave my party, UDA, today because, for instance, I have associated myself with a position that the leader of minority has taken in parliament, that as an individual, I have made a choice, and probably could also be a matter of belief? Would you then say that my political party, UDA's rights, override my individual political rights and freedoms as enshrined under Article 4 of the Constitution? 2, you have spoken about a mix of the electoral system with what you're calling proportional representation and the first past the post. I'd really want to understand how exactly would that proportional representation cure the problem that we were trying to address with a group that was ahead of you called Gamawado, on the question of one man, one vote. Actually, just one man, one vote, even without going to shilling, since you are dealing with political offices, just to ensure that there is equitable representation, because I honestly believe that there should and there must be equitable representation, so that every member of parliament represents an equal, almost equal number of constituents, not the situation that we are in today, where you find a member of parliament who has been elected by 5,000 people and has the same voting rights, the same vote as another member, for instance, a member for Ruiru constituency who has been elected by 180,000 voters. And they have the same, the equality of the vote then is not there when it comes to representation. How then would this system that you're proposing of a mix cure that problem? You have something, Mishima?
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Catherine Wambilianga, member of this committee. Though I've come in late, but I'll make a few observations having gone through your list. I am totally in agreement with your proposal of fast-tracking the constitution of the IEBC. But on the other side, you have not given the criteria categorically on how you want this proposed. You're only proposing that a member of your ORPP should be there. But what about the other criteria? And secondly, you have also given this proposal, you're backing our proposal on the two-third gender role. Fine, you have said nothing about it. You have just said we do a multi-sectoral committee. Give us the proper details of what you mean by multi-sectoral. What is it, professional? What qualifications would you want to be included? Thank you.
And you don't have to give all that now. You can still actually enrich your document after this.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So under 5 minutes, please respond.
Thank you. I will comment on a few and ask.
Sorry. There's one more issue from Honorable Kongo Mogeni.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Registrar, for your presentation. I just wanted to follow up from where Leader of Majority left, Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, on this issue of political rights. And I think you are the right person to help us. You know how we construct our constitution. We promote its purpose, its values, its principles. Now, following from the question that has been posed by Honorable Ichung'wah, our political rights, fundamental rights, can be limited as provided for in the Constitution. One of that limitation is in Article 103. You can belong to a party, you can be elected as a member of parliament, but there is that article that is entitled the vacation of office of a member of parliament. So you can belong to a party, as Honorable Mheshimiwa Ichung'wa says, but there's a way you can lose your seat. One of them is in Article 103, Sub-Article 1E, where you are deemed to have resigned from a party. And then Clause 3 says Parliament shall enact a legislation to provide circumstances under which a political party where a member will be deemed for purposes of Clause 1E to have resigned from the party. Now, you are the custodian of the enforcement of this article. I think either Section 14, if I remember well, of the
14.
Political Parties. Is it
14?
14? Yes. Says if a member supports the ideology, interest, or policies of another political party, he will be deemed to have resigned from a political party. So the Constitution itself is saying if you belong to this club of a political party, you don't support its ideology, its policies, you are deemed to have resigned. So, Madam Registrar, we are here, this forum is discussing issues of discipline, political parties, party hopping. We are now multi-party democracy. You can exercise your rights under Article 38. If you are not happy with the political party A, it's not like in Kano days where we had one party. You can quit, go back to the people, you will get your political rights, your belief, your conscience, you win through another party. The person to help us is you. Have you tried to enforce Article 14, or have you found yourself in circumstances where you are supposed to enforce Section 14 as read with Article 103, so that you help us in maintaining discipline within political parties? 2, I support you. You need to be entrenched in the Constitution. Have you faced intimidation or pressure from either the current government or even the previous government in discharging your functions under Article 103 and Section 14? Then finally, you have mentioned the critical role that agents play, and we are doing this for posterity, not for UDA, not for Azimio. This is just for posterity. On the issue of political agents, I like your proposal. We should restrict them to either a political party or independent candidates. Do you think there would be wisdom if we proposed that agents be picked by political parties, but budgetary allocation to pay them be part of the mandate of IEBC, so that Parliament here can appropriate money for paying agents? The parties pick, but IEBC pays them. Do you think that is something you can support? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Proceed, please.
Thank you. I will really talk about a few issues, and then I'll leave us my assistant registrars also to talk on the others. Let me start with the one of the political parties fund, was by Honorable Wadai. It is true that we have never realized the 0.3% since the inception of the fund in 2007. But I want to note that the fund has been growing over time, and giving in my tenure in the Office of Registrar of Political Parties. When I joined the office, I made 370 million as the political parties fund for everything. Right now, we are at close to 1.5 billion, meaning every year we have been growing the fund, and Treasury has been growing the fund, and government and appropriation in Parliament also. But we are not yet there, because our proposals are usually around 5 billion. Yeah, so it means we are not yet there. But we appreciate the fact that the fund has been growing over time. The reason why we are proposing the 0.3 to be entrenched into the Constitution is because there has been several attempts by different people, activists, wanting to remove even the 0.3. They say it's too much. But from where we sit, we think once it is entrenched in the constitution, probably that many attempts, and it's not once, but it's severally, attempts for people going to court and wanting the 0.3 to be reconsidered so that it moves. That is the reason. But I think it's not the only reason why we can realize the 0.3. There's also commitment and also improvement of economy. We all know that sometimes we don't have adequate funds for everything. That's why we appreciate any time the fund is grown. So our proposal to the government of the day is to at least have a commitment every year. We are adding some money on top of what is there so that progressively we capture it in our budget and we realize that in the perception of the fiscal year and the problems, probably financial problems, inadequate funds that we could be facing. The other issue I wanted to respond to is the talked about cannibalization of political parties. But I want to, first of all, the cannibalization is not done by the registrar of political parties. It is actually the cannibalization happens within the political class, outside the office of registrar of political parties. So you have little to do when people are cannibalizing each other outside you, but when they actually are alive, as we apply the requirement of the law, and we cannot hold politics by the neck, because politics must happen out there, and we cannot really come and regulate individual behaviors and how people want to come together. However, we have an obligation as an institution to check what the party, and you can see we are saying we need commitment from political parties themselves and political class to follow their own constitution, their own policies, and the Political Parties Act. Because sometimes, even so much has been done, you realize that what the parties are telling you to do as the registrar of political parties it is not even in their constitution, or it's not even in the Political Parties Act. They are taking you to a direction, and then you are attacked when you actually do not go that direction. But our commitment is to the law, your own party constitution, and also the requirement of the Political Parties Fund. So as far as politics is happening out there, I do not, indeed, most of the time, we let politics happen because we are not politicians ourselves. So when carbonization on number one day is happening out there, sometimes it's wrong to blame the regulator. Probably try to sort it from a political point of view outside there. I think that is our comment, which I know. And in regards to party hopping, I think the law is very clear. To us, once somebody has been elected on a particular party, there must be, if you want to move, then there must be the required regulations and laws on how you move from one political party to another, on how you move from one coalition to another. And that's what we have been enforcing. You tell us you want to move from one coalition to another, we tell you this is what you agreed at the coalition level. So if you don't fulfill the requirement of that coalition, then we tell you you have not moved. Then we require you to do what you are required to do. Then we allow you to move from one coalition to another, or from one party to another. The other issue I want to comment before I give Mr. Ari and Florence to finish up is the issue of the election system that we are proposing. What is it supposed to cure? Number one, we have seen during this presentation Kenyans coming and saying we want to even create more counties because we feel in the counties that we are in, we are underrepresented, or we are not able because our numbers are not enough. So what this is going to cure, when you make party lists based on a region, and we can elaborate that further, it means those people who are not being able to be elected, they have no constituency, for example. So they will never actually fight their way to parliament, whichever way, because their numbers cannot constitute a constituency. Then it means using party list, and you do regional list, you are able to capture those people who are outside the past the post positions. And then through the voting through party list, then you are bringing them to parliament. And that's why we are saying that is one method how you can cure the problem of people who feel very underrepresented, the minorities in this country, who can never make a constituency to end up in parliament. That is one thing. It is also cure the issue of two-third gender rule. That is where you can put women, that's where you can put the youth, you can balance the vote so that finally you finish. And then thirdly, it's going to strengthen political parties, because political parties will propose those lists, and then political parties list will be voted for. So even if a political party is not among the first and the second, it will still have a chance to have people coming from the list being elected and going to parliament through the party list. So it has, to us, it has a lot. But we are not saying we remove the first past the post and where the constituencies are, you remain with that, then make regional list, and every vote will count. It will actually reduce wastage of vote. You can tell me those parties that get votes to the extent of even 3 million, 5 million, those votes go to waste. They don't count, because they don't even count in political parties' fund. If they don't qualify, they don't count anywhere. So the wastage in elections in terms of vote will be minimized. Yeah, so that's why we are proposing it can cure many other things. So allow Mr. Ali.
Lucy, before you go to Ali, how does it cure equitable representation? How does it cure the problem of rural constituency, for instance, with 180,000 registered voters and a higher population being represented by one member of parliament, while another constituency that I will not name, a member is elected by 5,000 people?
Yeah, Mr. Ali will comment about that, but because there is a regionally made, we are looking after the elections, we are looking at a region, how many votes in the region, because we are saying, let's even do away with the closed party list. First of all, we are doing away with the closed party list. So after elections, it's when you look at the votes, the vote distribution. So because the lists are per region, then you distribute within the region. So you are capturing also the number of votes that have been cast in a particular region. Yeah, but Mr. Ali, please comment also about that.
Right. Thank you very much, co-chairs and members of the committee. Just 3 issues. Number one is the issue of cannibalization. I think I want to say one thing about that. Basically, we are in this space, and the political landscape, of course, shows that there are a lot of wrangles within the parties. We might not call it cannibalization, but wrangles. And what we have seen is some of these issues result as a result of lack of internal democracy and lack of strong leadership. So as an office, we are building capacities of parties to have concrete ideologies, strong leadership, and internal democracy, which calls for inclusive decision making. Once that happens within political parties, then it becomes very difficult to infiltrate those parties, even by members, those who are not members of that party. So we are advocating for inclusive decision making by political parties, internal democracy, strong leadership, and a concrete ideology that all members of that party identify with. Once we have that, then it becomes very difficult for any party to be infiltrated and hence probably cannibalized. The issue of individual rights versus political rights, which was raised by Honorable Chungwa, I think Honorable Mogeni has touched on it, whatever he wanted to say. In terms of those rights, the Constitution also has mandated Parliament to come up with laws on management of political parties and those positions, and also it's one of the ways in which one loses seat. But what is important, and what we have seen in other jurisdictions, is that parties sometimes also give room for individual members to follow their conscience, provided that it is not very far from what the party believes in. So the individual consciousness of a member, which must also be respected by the party. In other jurisdictions, party usually ask every member, when they're elected, to give about 3 or 4 matters that they think are very close to them, that even if the party takes a different position, they will not be punished. If they take a different position from the party position, they will not be punished. And they usually declare that. So if we have that kind of a scenario, then we might also promote some individual consciousness of members who are also representing their voters. So there's need to be that balance between political party position and individual members' consciousness, which sometimes is also very, very important to be considered. So deeming only comes when you outrightly oppose the party ideology on all positions, not just because of one matter or two, which you followed your conscience. I think that is also covered by the Constitution. In the issue of the issue of freedom of association and rights, I think that has been captured very well. It's also a constitutional issue. And finally, the issue about the agents. I think we don't have an issue with that proposal. Agents are recognized as poll officials in the Elections Act, but also in the Political Parties Act, there are some mandate for which is given to the RPP for training of agents, because again, it's possible, it can be done. Thank you.
However, that the PPLC is not expressly financed and funded. Every time we have developed programs for PPLC, of course, with the steering committee of PPLC, we realize that the allocation given for their budget is very minimal. So a lot of the programs and activities that they would undertake and realize. And to say that while Article 92 of the Constitution under sub-article 3, that Parliament will make legislation, we see that legislation, especially those that are elected, but of course generally all the members. So parties who have attempted to deem members, and they have actually written to the office of the registrar for the expulsion of their members through the deeming process, you realize that they don't follow the due process, because the due process is clearly prescribed in the Act, Section 14. But I believe if they follow the due process, including according those members a fair hearing, then the office of the registrar would have no problem concluding that process. But we urge parties that they should also observe the due process. Then quickly, the issue of strengthening of ORPP. Yeah. For sure, we are not seeking this for purposes of ourselves. We have a single term of 6 years as the current office holders, and we could be very comfortable and leaving it at that. But we have a duty to make sure that this office is strengthened because of the place value it has in the strengthening of democracy in this country. And therefore, one, we seek that it be enshrined in the Constitution, not because there's been any pressure, but we believe that it rightfully belongs there, and therefore it should be entrenched there. But also, number two, the mandate, so that it can be able to effectively deliver its mandate within the space of the statutes. I would have added some more, but allow me to stop there in the interest of time. Thank you so much.
Please do.
Thank you so much. Chair, let me conclude by saying we appreciate the invite and to appear before you. Allow me only to really weigh on that issue of political rights of individuals versus those ones of a party. We other jurisdiction, and we really benchmark with others. In Europe, the parties come out with what they call programs. And when you are joining a political party or being elected under a political party, you commit to that program, that our party, in issues of taxes, we stand for this. In issues of women's rights, we stand for this. In issues of this, so that when later you come to tell me I am going outside the party, at least there's a reference that I committed to certain things. Because as Mr. Ari said, there must be a balance between political rights of a party and also political rights of an individual and political rights of the people who elected the member. Because this member is also representing a constituency. So that constituency also have a right to tell how he has a right to go and consult with the members of a constituency. So those are three things, Chairman, that must be balanced. The representative, the party interest through the party programs and what people committed to. Two, the individual member, and also the rights of the people who elected this person, the constituent, so that he can also consult the constituents and say, this is the way my people want me to represent them. I think that balance must be created. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Registrar. Maybe moving forward, what you should do is probably guide now political parties on how to do those programs and make proposals of what legislative interventions would be done for those party programs to be there. So that as I run for a seat on UDA, this is what I subscribe to.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. We have heard you, all of us. So next we have Attorney General Emeritus, Professor Githu Muigai. Who is also an old boy of the school. I used to beat as a black belt.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members. Thank you for inviting me. I have very few words because you have directed me to the specific issues that you would like me to pronounce myself on. And subject to any further directions, I want to go straight to that agenda.
Please do.
The first question that you put to me relates to the question of restructuring IEBC and the audit of the 2022 elections. First, I would like to state that it's been my very unfortunate duty to be involved in the reconstitution of IEBC previously, a process that was very, very difficult for all the parties involved. I remember that we disbanded the entire IEBC, sent them home, and we started afresh. I would personally be against institutionalizing that kind of thing. I do not support creating a permanent state of instability in institutions. For example, we have reconstituted the judiciary twice. And I think that some good gains were made by that process, but I think that that process created some inherent instability in the institution itself. But I'm not here to talk about the judiciary. I'm here to talk about IEBC. We have tried several methods of constituting IEBC. When, Mr. Chairman, you recall, we came out of the crisis of the 80s, and we had IPPG. It was thought that what we should do is to allow political parties to nominate individual members into the IEBC. It was an unmitigated disaster. It was an unmitigated disaster. And I don't think we should be tempted again to allow party participation in the appointment of commissioners. I believe myself that we need an independent, robust process of recruitment. At the present, I am not very sure that the system in place is giving us our best first 11. Now, how can we strengthen it? I think that, for example, when they say the Law Society of Kenya, my own professional body, is to send a representative, I am not very sure that that necessarily creates autonomy. Or when they say religious leaders will have a representatives, or trade union leaders, and so on and so forth. I think we need to find a way of forming that constitutive body that will interview those who qualify for these positions. I agree with those who say that there is no legal reason why the chairman should be a lawyer, because the election is more than a legal process. It's a management process. And what we want to do is be able to elect into the commission good managers, strong managers, proven managers, who then can hire the best lawyers that they can, either within the secretariat itself or from outside the secretariat, hopefully whom they can be able to pay. Number two, should we go back to ask ourselves what happened in the 2022 election? My own honest opinion is that it is not a useful exercise. Why is it not useful? Because again, it reopens the question that has been resolved with finality by the Supreme Court. The challenge with reopening matters that have been judicially settled is that you, by necessary implication and inadvertently, you create the possibility that confidence in that institution can be eroded. And I don't think that that would give us, in going forward, it would create a permanent state of electoral instability, because no matter who would win or lose, no matter what the Supreme Court would say, that party would say, we know. In fact, in that year, the Supreme Court said this, but when we did a forensic audit, the forensic audit produced a different outcome. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that the work of the Supreme Court is not to declare that the election was conducted without a hitch. That is not the standard. It is not to find whether there was any hitch. In fact, since I started participating in these elections in 2013, before the Supreme Court, 10 years ago, the Supreme Court has always said there was a hitch. There was a hitch. But the standard of the law is, was there a hitch of such a substantial nature that it affected the outcome of the election? And in 4 of the cases I participated in, the answer was no. In 1, the Supreme Court said, yes, this is not good. This is not a hitch. This has gone beyond a hitch. I didn't agree with them then, but I respected that opinion and I obeyed it. And as the Attorney of the Republic, I went back and started arranging for a new election, which we did hold thereafter. One of the problems we have, ladies and gentlemen, in these constitutional timelines that are locked up in the Constitution, it confirms what the philosopher said, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. When we wrote the Constitution here in Bomas, we thought that putting timelines by which the court must determine the dispute, we were making sure that the country would be stable, that a transition would be done quickly. We were wrong. It now turns out, in my experience, that this time is not enough. And this method that we use, this method that is by documents only, by affidavits only, and so on, is not enough. So that's one thing that if we were to reopen that process, that is one area that the experts would probably need to look at, the timelines. In fact, we almost ran into a constitutional crisis in 2017. We dodged a bullet by the sheer love of God, because Parliament had broken up, had prorogued, Parliament had gone home, it couldn't make more law, it couldn't make law to guide us, and the judges had found the night before the election that election officers had been wrongly appointed. It took the Court of Appeal sitting at night to deal with that technical problem. Where the life of the nation is concerned, we don't want those near hits. We then went into an election where I think had we missed the timeline, there would have been no government, and that's the constitution we have. If the election is not, for example, if we do an election, the Electoral Commission declares a presidential winner, a petition is filed, members of the Supreme Court are kidnapped, we do not hear the petition and finalize it within the period provided, then we have no government. I think these are very dangerous propositions, and we want to have a more flexible system. And I know there are many experts who can help us deal with that. So that's all I wish to say about IEBC, about reopening the question. About boundaries delimitation, I want to start by saying that my own personal view, which is not a view shared by many of my countrymen, is that we have too many people in Parliament. We have too many constituencies, so that we should be reducing constituencies, not increasing. We have too many counties. We should reduce counties, not increase counties. They are costing us a lot of money, and quite a number of them are not viable. When we were in Bomas, the constitution we gave you, ladies and gentlemen of the Honorable August House of Parliament, I think we had given you 9 counties. 14, I'm corrected, 14. It was when the politicians went to Naivasha that they came to this compromise of let's go to 41. I think if we are to reopen this constitution, one of the issues we can usefully reopen is the reduction of counties. Bring more counties together and let them work together and mobilize resources together and share together. So I'm not a great fan of increasing counties or indeed of increasing constituencies. And this may bring me then to another issue which I was supposed to take later. This issue of the gender rule, we call it the gender rule, but essentially, really, it is the women empowerment rule. I struggled with it when I was the Attorney of the Republic, and we came to grief. For as many bills as we worked on, we came to grief. And I want to be very, very honest with you. First, there is a feeling among many Kenyans that we have not done enough to justify this. Our social education around this has not been successful. And we need to do some more civic education around why empowering women has the effect of empowering the whole community in the long run, or let's say in the medium term. What would be my solution about this? Of all the ones we have tried, I think only one can succeed. And that is to abolish the woman's seat, to abolish the seat of the woman representative completely, and then to create 2 seats in every constituency, one for a woman and one for a man. In fact, we end up with 50% being women. We improve. We do better than the 30% that we already have. And that one is neat. It is achievable without much mathematics, arithmetics, and it is straightforward. That would be my proposal. There is an issue you put to me, honorable members, that is...
Sorry, Prof, sorry. You said 290 times 2. That's how many? 580?
Oh, you know, my original proposal is that we reduce the constituencies. So we would first reduce the constituencies, then have, to about 100 constituencies, then have 1 man, 1 woman in each of those 100 constituencies.
Give us 200.
Yes. Yes. And the office and status of a member of parliament will be restored. There is one issue, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, you asked me to talk about, and that is the issue of socioeconomic rights, which is the issue of the cost of living. This is a chicken and egg problem that is, in my view, very, very hard to. We need the economy to function at a certain level in order to produce goods and services that allow us to distribute. It is the legendary Tom Mboya in the ideological debates of the 60s that he held with senior Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. And the grand old man, Jaramogi, was talking about distributing wealth. And Tom Mboya kept reminding him, we need to create the wealth first. That problem is alive today as it was in the 1960s. We need to create wealth in order to distribute it. And therefore, socioeconomic rights are economic rights. Socioeconomic rights are important, fundamental rights in the Constitution. But we need to fund them. In order to respect them, we need to be able to fund them. So we need the economy to grow. We are in a chicken and egg position. We need the economy to grow in order for us to fund socioeconomic rights. The economy is not growing, therefore we are not funding. So that is the problem. That is the problem. Because no matter which government is in control, our envelope, our financial envelope is the same. And as long as that envelope is not growing, we will not be able. We will not be able to give free meals in schools, which, as many of you know, that would be a big game changer. Because our students sometimes perform very poorly because they haven't eaten. They just haven't had a good meal. They can't stay awake in the class, and so on. So if we could fund that, it would be a huge game changer. To fund it is a huge budgetary item. And I could go to many other important socioeconomic concerns. So my suggestion is that we need to progressively enforce socioeconomic rights, progressively, and in the communities that deserve them the most. We used to say that the majesty of French law is that it treats the king in his castle the same way it treats the beggar in the street. That cannot be a very good law, can it? We cannot treat everybody equally because not everybody is in the same circumstances. When we enforce socioeconomic laws, we must start with the most vulnerable, so that the most vulnerable are attended to first, with the most basic needs, so that they can live a minimum dignity that is accorded to them. Now, let me say something about, I've talked about the two-thirds. This issue of defecting from political parties, this also is as old as our history, honorable members. In fact, the first thing that happened after independence, on the anniversary of independence and on the birth of the Republic, is that people crossed floors. Kadu crossed the floor. Kadu was the opposition. It crossed the floor. I think the last man who was left screaming and kicking was Joseph Martin Shikuku. And I remember at that time, from the reading I have done, there wasn't a lot of noise about the democratic character of crossing the floor. But in '66, when KPU was formed and KPU crossed the floor, the very erudite Joseph Thomas Mboya was very, very, very critical. He was saying to cross the floor is to lose the mandate of the party that elected you. Now, and I have a sympathy. Yes, please. I have sympathy for that. I think that we should have in law mechanisms of containing persons to the parties to the parties on whose platform they were elected. So that's my opinion on that. Now, what is the last issue?
It's not clear, sorry. Yeah. Just make it clear. What is your position on that?
My position is that if I presented myself to the people of Kamukunji as a member of the Kenya African National Union, and I was elected as such, I should be obligated, if I am to continue for the 5 years, to retain fidelity to that party, the party on whose platform I was elected. If I crossed the floor and became, in fact, and voted with and became associated with the Kenya African Democratic Union, then I should vacate my seat and a by-election should be held. That's my opinion. It is not a popular opinion, I know, among politicians. However, you told me to come and talk about my opinion. Let me now tell you an even more unpopular, let me give you a more unpopular view, and it is my last one. I do not believe, as a constitutional lawyer and historian, that there is any justification for any fund. There is no justification for the Constituency Development Fund. There is no justification for Affirmative Action Fund, and there is no justification for Senate Override Fund. We have one government at two levels. We have a national government. The fund of the national government is in the Treasury. It is kept by the National Cabinet Secretary to the Treasury. The second fund is the governor, is in the county. It is kept by the governor. Any other fund has no place in our constitutional architecture. There should be only money in two levels. national level and at the county level. Let me tell you why I have another difficulty with this. I have another difficulty with our members of parliament, our honorable members of parliament, becoming both the appropriators of fund, debating the budget, appropriating cash, then following the cash themselves, yes, and spending the cash. I think it blurs the roles, because the work of parliament is to tax and to spend, then to oversight, right? So I don't feel very comfortable when the member of parliament has fought very hard for money to go to Kiambu County. Then before it arrives, it finds him sitting in the constituency. So that is a personal view, but one that I hold very strongly. I would like to see my senator and my member of parliament oversighting, calling, and I have seen the Senate, for example, is very, very, very robust on this role, and I think that's the correct role. Says to the governor, this is the report we have received, tell us how you spent this money. If the senator was down there himself spending some money, I think the ability to ask another spender how he spent might be compromised. So unfortunately, I don't support that. Now, finally, do I oppose the setting up of the office of leader of the official opposition? No, I don't oppose at all. Actually, I think it makes politics neater. It makes politics neater. It keeps this general closer to his troops, or to her troops for that matter. The truth is, in a democracy, the opposition is a government in waiting. And therefore, in fact, the opposition has shadow cabinet ministers. So they should be operating in parliament, shadowing the other cabinet minister, asking them questions that are informed and that help to show that this party, at the next election, they are ready. They are ready to be the government. They are responsible, they are organized, and that is their general there, the leader of the official opposition. And he is accorded all due. In a democracy, the leader of the opposition actually has such high level of security clearance that he is briefed. He is briefed the same way the president is briefed. If there are national security questions, he's briefed. If there are internal threats, external threats, he's briefed. If they are visiting delegations and so on, the leader of the opposition is briefed. So that, and that is why in a democracy we call it the royal opposition, the loyal opposition. The opposition is not a hostile. It's not a hostile group of people. It is part and parcel of government. It is loyal. The opposition is loyal to the government of the day. Because after the next election, chances are that the opposition will be the government and the government will be the opposition. That's the way it should work. Finally, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, I have no problem with that. I think it is a way of organizing cabinet to make it more efficient, to make it more... I found out in my time in the cabinet that cabinet works best if the committee systems work. But the committee systems are very difficult to organize if there isn't somebody who is chairing them, bringing them together, and supervising them. The president cannot do that. He's very busy. The vice president is very busy deputizing. And by default, I did find at one point, when we had a very, very heavy legislative agenda immediately after the new constitution, I found myself playing that role, bringing people to the state law office and organizing around the legislation that we had. So I would have no difficulty with that at all. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I spoke for too long. Your Excellency, Honorable Dr. Kalonzo, you were not here before, so I would like to acknowledge you. And that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that very incisive engagement with quite a number of unpopular views, with as you said, with the political class.
Yeah.
And maybe on a light note, is that how the case on NGCDF was lost in court when you were AG?
Well, it was lost in the Supreme Court after I had left. By the way, when I was there, and this my colleagues on the left will confirm, a lawyer never argues his opinion. He argues his instructions. When the case first started, my instructions from the government of the day was to support CDF, and we supported CDF. Now, today I'm speaking as a citizen.
Well, I want to be the first to go, Prof, and to tell you how pleased I am to see you this morning and to listen to your very candid views about issues that are confronting us as a country and which we find are engaging the mandate of this committee. So thank you for volunteering to come and hear us, and we'll hear you. One of the things that I would want to have your views on is, we know our bicameral nature of legislature, the National Assembly and the Senate. Occasionally, we have instances of sibling rivalry. So you get the feeling the Senate is being sat upon by the National Assembly, and of course the chair of the Parliamentary Service Commission happens to be the Speaker of the National Assembly. So what would be your view? I once visited Nigeria to see a friend who was a Speaker of the Senate, because they'd invited me to the National Prayer Breakfast, the first edition of the same in Nigeria. His name was David. And he was, because the Speaker of the Senate, he was the chair of the bicameral legislature. David Mack was his name. And I find that personally, because of what you say, the oversight role of the Senate, even in our country, seems to be more defined as presently constituted than, forgive me, Majority Leader and Minority Leader, the National Assembly, than it is in the case of the National Assembly. What would be your view? Wouldn't we probably just be candid about this? As you've been candid about the funds, you don't like them, and it is very, very clear. That's my number one comment. The next one is, it has to do with rights. I'm sure you're a preeminent lawyer, human rights, I'm sure is also within your province, constitutional law notwithstanding. If you give a people a constituency, and then they hear that this committee, in its wisdom or lack of it, has come up with recommendations to do away with 190 constituencies, wouldn't you think that is disenfranchising our people? And the more practical thing is, in fact, when the boundaries delimitation team is in place, we'll be hearing them. You'll be hearing people saying, we want, because the closer the administration is, the closer the member of parliament is to the people, the MCA, the better it is. Because the maxim, you know, there can be no taxation without representation. And this issue of taxation, I don't know whether you really dealt with it, the high cost of living. Eugene, I'm sure if he gets a time, he'll be able to address you extensively on that. Because you said the role of the MP is to tax and then to collect revenue, tax, and then oversight. This is the ideal situation. So on those 2 points, I really would want to gain your wisdom. And as I said, it's so good to see you again. I was Vice President when you were Attorney General, and clearly this country owes you plenty. I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kocha, AG, we will ask you to be noting the questions we take around, and you will answer. And maybe I'll go second round before I give the Honorable Pio Wandai, Hassan Omar, then Honorable Eugene Omaro. And Wambilianga will close for us if Mugeni will not have any. You spoke on the question of the constitution of IEBC, and you did indicate that the IPPG model was what you described as an unmitigated disaster for the country. And you seem to prefer the professional mode of appointment of IPPG. I just want clarification whether that would be what has been proposed by one of the professional organizations as going for a professional sort of human resource consultant to recruit the commissioners, or the current model that we have where you have a panel that then goes to look out for professionals through a competitive process. I want to hear your view on that. What, in your view, would be that professional model to use? Then, in reconstituting that IEBC, from your experience as AG, because you say you are involved in the reconstitution of IEBC, and I believe the time you were AG, it was a panel model that was used, as it still is in the laws today. Do you think that panel system as it is today sufficiently covers all stakeholders, or are there stakeholders that you feel we would be able to incorporate in that panel system? Opio?
Thank you very much, and I'll be very quick. AG, just on the same issue of the IPPG. In fact, I was rather surprised when you described the IPPG as unmitigated disaster. Unmitigated disaster, just to use your words. And yet we know for sure that every time we have reconstituted the IBC, or electoral body for that matter, it has been in response to a political situation. If you agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I do.
Then how this IPPG, from my recollection, was meant to address a political situation then, in 1997. Remember, it came at the backdrop of the clamor for reforms. And the mantra then was no reforms, no elections. And it's also documented that the Electoral Commission that was born out of the IPPG supervised the 1997 elections. Okay? But it went ahead to supervise the 2002 elections. That has been billed as one of the best elections in this country. So then, and in fact, what happened thereafter is what perhaps could have led to a disaster, if I'm not wrong. Because in I think 2005 or thereabout, the then president, when at the expiry of the term of the Electoral Commission, then the IPPG Electoral Commission, unilaterally appointed commissioners to the commission against the wishes of the opposition, very strong wishes of the opposition. And the rest, as they say, is history. What followed then, you know. Then, what then would motivate you to describe IPPG wholesome as a disaster? Just let me understand. Yet, from where I sit, I thought it was one of the best approaches to dealing with the issue of inclusivity and consensus building. Two, you say you don't agree at all with the matter of revisiting the presidential elections of 2022. But it won't be helpful, it will be futile, to paraphrase you. But what do you make of the clear provision of Article 88, sub-Article 4H of the Constitution, which requires, let me just read, which requires the IBC to facilitate the observation, monitoring, and evaluation of elections. Elections, all types of elections, whether presidential, parliamentary, ward, and so on and so forth. From where we sit, we know the IBC has been able to facilitate the observation and monitoring of the 2022 elections. So far as the evaluation of those elections is concerned, nothing of the sort has been done. Would you be opposed to the evaluation of the elections as contemplated in Article 88 4H? Last, you say you have got no problem with the creation of the office of leader of opposition. And you seem to suggest that the officer could sit in parliament. But you don't clarify further whether you want this office created within the framework of a parliamentary system, or presidential system, or some sort of hybrid system. Thank you.
Okay, Omar.
Thank you very much. My recollection is that probably the 1997 elections was by far one of the most violent, and they were actually mitigated by the IPPG Electoral Commission. Number two, I think there should be we are not revisiting the Supreme Court decision. That is settled. I do not think we want to create an impression, at least from our side, that we are in any way reopening the Supreme Court verdict or process. We are, though, open to listening to whether there is a process of auditing the processes so that we continue to improve on the systems and electoral management, but not to revisit in any way the decision of the Supreme Court. But my actual fundamental question to you is on the issue of the ECOSOC rights, economic, social, cultural rights that you articulated yourself to. You know, our Constitution talks in many regards about social justice. And there's a very radical understanding of what social justice is to make those who are worse off better off before those who are better off become well off. So there are those who are better off who are earning taxes or who are earning salaries, and you're asking them to support housing projects for the vulnerable. You're asking them to pay 2.75% to fund affordable and accessible healthcare under the UHC program. That is part of the dictates of the Constitution, that these programs cannot wait under the classical capitalism, that we first, all of us, make wealth before we start to disperse wealth. It must go concurrently. As we are making wealth, We must disperse wealth, and we must disperse part of these advantages that come to protect or to cushion the people at the lowest prism of our society. That's why if you see part of the taxations that is being proposed, it is largely to fund economic and social rights, housing, healthcare, and the such, so that those who have a little more are told to make a small sacrifice, so that those who have nothing are put to a level that they are better off before all of us can become well off. It's actually the constitutional mechanics. So I wanted to slightly you to speak to it, whether this social democracy or democratic socialism, as it is called, isn't about expanding the tax for those who have more and for possibly helping those who have less. This outcry, when you are setting up universal health care, when you are setting up housing programs, were outcries that we even saw in the United States when Obamacare was trying to, find a footing, or other social programs were trying to find a footing. The last one. You talked, Opia, you were told you are a government in waiting. The only problem of the opposition is they don't want to wait. But I do agree that Kimani Ichung'wah, as leader of majority, can have a relationship where, in matters of national security, there can be a certain nexus of briefing between the two parties, so that time and again people are appraised with matters of state. The one or two of your radical opinions, but because I'm also in that space of politics, are very popular with me internally, but I cannot express open support for it. I just do believe that there should be clear separations of power, but if this committee should so decide to, as constitutional as the funds, I shall support that position.
I think, Hassan, you have to be bold as you can be in some of these things. We'll hear now Honorable Eugene.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think on the issues of electoral justice, there has been an issue about the last general election, and there are those who have described it as one of the best elections, or one of the most credible elections. We believe this was one of the most incredible elections. We had never seen a situation.
I think Hassan should put off his microphone.
We had never seen a situation where the electoral body is split. It's like a split jury, or almost a hung jury, but in this case, the majority of the commissioners disowned the results. The chairman, with the minority, only 2, upheld the results. And the country found itself in a political and legal terra incognita. It's an unprecedented situation. That's why I'm saying it was not normal. They were not normal elections. And we were particularly looking at the provisions of Article 138, 3C, and the Supreme Court pronounced itself on it by saying the decision of the Commission, IEBC, should be a corporate decision in terms of the results, tallying, verifying. It should be a corporate, it cannot be the decision of the chair. And when you come to, of course, Article 138.10, the chair is the one who declares. But in a situation where we have a rogue chair, this time we have the chair and only 2 commissioners. But we can find ourselves in a situation in future where the chair disagrees with the commission, and the chair by himself declares results that probably the rest of the commission does not agree with. The Supreme Court was very clear in interpreting that particular article, that we find, and I quote this ruling, we find that the chairperson cannot arrogate himself the power to verify and tally the results of a presidential election to the exclusion of the other members of the Commission. Indeed, Article 138(10) of the Constitution, although the power to declare the results of a presidential election after verification and tallying is vested in the chairperson, he does not, or he does so only as a delegate of the Commission, with the corporate decision of the Commission. Going into the future, we would like to get your opinion on that in terms of advice in putting the country on a more political and legal terra firma in terms of such situations arising in future. What would you advise on that? On the issue of the cost of living, as His Excellency Kalonzo has said, these socioeconomic rights under Article 43 also include the rights under Article 201 on the finance, the taxation, and the equitable taxation of the citizens, and equitable sharing of the tax burden. In the current situation today in this country, there are many Kenyans who cannot put food on the table because of the high cost of living, and particularly the Finance Act 2023 that saw everything going up, particularly the cost of fuel. On fuel alone, we have almost 16 or so levies and taxes that have really increased fuel to unprecedented levels. And we're not talking of just the mamambogas in the village who have to pay over 33 shillings more for kerosene out there in the village. Life is becoming unbearable. Even our journalists here and professionals, anyone with a pay slip today is really an endangered species because of the many taxes. What would you advise? There have been proposals here, and we wanted to hear from you, because it is a policy decision, and enjoyment of those socioeconomic rights under Article 43, it's not a favor from the government. Under Article 21, it is the fundamental duty of the state to ensure enjoyment of those rights by the citizen. In terms of policy measures, so if there are wrong policies that have been put in place that have overburdened the citizen, what would you advise in terms of probably reduction of some of the taxes or reviewing of some of those levies on fuel, on electricity? We really would like to hear from you so that we can, as a committee, make appropriate recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Catherine was to go first.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Professor, for your presentations. I am one of those who is actually going to agree with you on most of your popular presentations. These are very unpopular amongst politicians, but to some of us, they're very popular. I first want to associate myself with your comment on the 2022 elections and the presidential results. Actually, for the first time, compared to 1997, 2013, 2017, the 2022 was less problematic. This is just the simple reason. On the ballot and on the final day, actually Uhuru was whitewashed at the ballot so badly that he quickly conceded. And next, we also look at one other very unpopular point, and this is a very great idea, where on very fair basis, let us abolish the seat of women rep and create 2 seats in every constituency. The only biggest undoing with that point is the reduction of the constituencies. Is there a way, Senior Professor, which you can modify that point in such a manner that instead of reducing, let us look at a way and get us a way, give us a formula, I know with your wisdom you can, of which we can have these 2 seats one man and one woman introduced in every constituency. And popular as it is, that is the best point that I've had in the better day of today. And clearly, it is clear you have said empowering a woman is like empowering the whole society. So I'm sure if the 2/3 gender rule was to take off, that is the best solution. And I even beg that this committee adopts that kind of policy. Thank you.
Okama.
Thank you. Chairman, first, you know, having listened to Prof, I'm one of those proud Kenyans who were taught by a professor. He welcomed me to University of Nairobi as a first-year student. The only thing that he was shocked about my person is when I told him the school I'd come from. He wondered whether I never knew that there was a school called Alliance and why I never went to Alliance. But,
correction, Senator, not a school.
There
was the school called Alliance.
Yes, but happy to see you, Prof. And we are really going to benefit, you know, from your presentation. I hope there will be some written memo that you will leave behind that will assist us. Now, we are where we are because we are a country on crossroads. We are trying to find a solution to some of the problems we are facing. Just like the people who wrote the American Constitution in 1787 were trying to address the concerns of the 17 states that were trying to secede. And we need to get solutions that can fit into our own unique local circumstances. Now, on the issue of IEBC, you know we have had two scenarios. IBC commissioners picked through the IPPG model, and the one of 2007 picked through a very professional process where meritocracy was the guiding really thing and technical knowledge. But if you read paragraph 55 of the Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court judges said all this, in our view, points to a serious malaise in the governance of an institution entrusted one of the monumental tasks of midwifing our democracy, an institution that obviously needs far-reaching reforms. That was the Supreme Court, and you have said you agree with the Supreme Court. Prof, I would want you to give a comment on whether you deem it to be a success story, the Electoral Commission of Mozambique that is picked through Parliament on the strength of political party representation with an input of civil society, after which they take oath of office to discharge their functions in a fairly professional manner. Would you, Prof, really have an objection to solve our problems? We also adopt a system that accommodates all the political heavyweights so that we have a confidence-building process in the management of an election. And then we can have the technical staff in our constituencies, our counties, dealing with issues of running and managing an election. I like your comment, taking Mozambique as one of the success stories where political parties pick the electoral commissioners. That's one. Number two, on the principle in the Constitution that an election should be very viable. Is there any problem if there was to be an audit of the servers just to confirm the results that were announced by IEBC as a way of complying with the Constitution? And then the final question, on that paragraph that I've read, 55 of the Supreme Court decision, would you support a reform of IBC that includes the vetting of staff of the Commission in view of that finding of the Supreme Court. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Prof. You can take those ones.
Thank you very much for all of you, your kind remarks, especially His Excellency Dr. Kalonzo Musyoka, who has said very kind things about my tenure as the attorney. Those views may not be widely shared, but I treasure that compliment. Now, you asked me, sir, whether we should rethink the bicameral arrangement that is in this country. The truth again is, the draft that we drew here in Bomas had the Senate as the upper house and the House and the National Assembly as the lower house. So we, the technicians, thought that that's how a bicameral legislature should work. It is the politicians who reversed the order. And in fact, it was very interesting because I remember people like my late friend and colleague, the Honorable Mutula Kilonzo, who was among those who were opposed to the arrangement in Bomas, the Honorable Kembi Gitura, another friend of mine, they were opposed. And later, they went to the Senate and found that there wasn't the work that they had gone there to do. And they wanted us to find a way, now I was in government with them, of finding work for the Senate that was equal to the status of the Senate. So this is an issue that we can, depending on how widely we want to open the reform process, it is an issue that can usefully be revisited. I personally always conceived of the Senate as the house where our more senior politicians, more experienced, much more, diplomatic, politicians would be sitting as a house of elders and so on. In fact, in some countries, this upper chamber is not wholly elected, so that it allows, for example, this is a very self-serving example. So, say a professor who has now retired from public service to sit there and comment on bills and so on. So I agree that it is an issue that we can look into. You asked me about if we were to reduce constituencies, are we not disenfranchising people? They were used to being called Kiambu constituency, Kajiado constituency, and now it covers a whole area. I think as long as the resources are available for distribution, I don't think that people would necessarily be seriously concerned. I come from a constituency, not where we are now, and I am not very sure where it reaches to the north. I don't know how far it reaches to the south. I do know that I am here, I have a member of parliament, and I'm happy. If tomorrow I was told Westlands has been added to your constituency, I am not sure I relate specifically to the loss. If there is efficiency, I think we want members of parliament to be capacitated. It's the resource question. If the MP has the resources to look after the I don't think wananchi worry so much whether they they are next to each other or further away from each other. This cost of living issue, Your Excellency, this is we keep going around with it because essentially it's a resource issue. I think I personally have come to accept the fact that the government has no money of its own. The government has no money of its own. The government has only money raised through taxation, through borrowing, and through gifts. And we have a very complicated problem where I hear the public say, and it's a very important argument, stop taxing. Stop taxing. Kenyans usually also use the word stop overtaxing. Then they say stop borrowing. So stop borrowing and stop taxing and increase spending. Now that is an impossibility. I'm not an economist, but I am a man from the University of Life, and I know that in the University of Life, if you don't tax and you do not borrow and you have not been gifted by somebody, then you don't have it. So we must cut our cloth to fit our resources. I don't believe that we can tax ourselves out into progress. But I do think that the only thing that you can be certain as a human being is death and taxes. Those, they have to be. Now, without making light of that very important question, I think that there are tax policies, and I hear everybody around this room who is saying that tax policies must be stable. If they are not stable, an investor, and I personally worry a lot about local investors, not foreign investors. The local investor is not able to invest within a tax regime that changes too much, that is not stable. And therefore, I agree with all those who have said that that is something we ought to look into. Chairman Shungwa asked me about IPPG, and I think Honorable Wandati as well. The truth is this, ladies and gentlemen, and we must talk truth to each other because this is our country. This IPPG model is a horse trading model. It is a horse trading model. And I challenge you, when you retire later in the day, when you do your research, the IPPG IEBC contained individuals who were directly connected with the appointment. I can tell you there were at least 2 lawyers who were lawyers to the appointing party. So it's not as transparent as it would appear. And although it delivered one good election, we also know that it had its own internal. So what do I think about it? I think that the model that works is a professionalized model. Is the one we have now professionalized? Sufficiently, but not fully. And that's where we need to fix. We need to fully professionalize. And this now brings me to the question by Honorable Wandati. I agree entirely that part of the crisis that arose out of the unilateral appointments that came post-IPPG. Because those unilateral appointments created the political impression that there was no commitment to fairness. And I agree that that was not the right thing to do. And maybe had that not been done, probably the crisis that we had in 2007, 2008 could have been avoided. But we have the hindsight of history. I agree with those who say the election is over. The Supreme Court has pronounced itself on it. We are not looking to audit it for accuracy. We are looking to audit process for improvement. Those are two different arguments, and my problem was with the first one, and I think my very good friend, the Honorable Amalwa, gave me the impression that like he would have wanted an audit that goes to an examination of outcome. That's what I said I don't think would be useful. An audit that would go to investigate whether there was system failure at any point and whether that system can be improved so that it never misfires again, I think that nobody would quarrel with that. Now, Honorable Omar, socioeconomic rights, Honorable Omar says, and where shall we fund this? Where shall we fund social justice from? And I would concede the argument that we must fund it from taxes. There is no other way to affordable housing. There is no other way to healthcare. There is no other way to schooling. There is no other way to a decent environment. We are just about to have an El Nino that will put hundreds of thousands of Kenyans living by the riversides of our country in grave and mortal danger. And the only way we can protect that is again to spend more. We have to spend more on protecting that. And unfortunately, I have a feeling we would have to either borrow or tax. And that is the reality of it. Honorable Amalwa wanted to know whether there is Article 138 of the Constitution, whether there is a distinction between the chair and the commission. I believe there is. Whether the decision declared by the Electoral Commission is that of the chair or of that of the commission. It must be that of the commission. And the Supreme Court did find in this particular case that that was the decision of the commission, because all the commissioners, including those who allegedly denounced the election, had participated in the tallying of the vote. And the distinction between participating in that and participating in the announcement was dealt with, in my very humble view, quite sufficiently by the Supreme Court. Equitable taxation, again, I agree with that. I agree that taxation must create equity, but I also believe that in a democracy such as ours, those who have the resources, like members of parliament, must be taxed more, so that we can be able to provide for the community and the society. And those like university professors who don't earn a lot should be taxed less. because they do not have the resources. And school teachers who earn even less should be taxed less. So I agree that there ought to be equity in taxation.
Information, Prof. Not just equity. I refer you to the provisions of Article 201, B1. And I read, the burden of taxation shall be shared fairly.
Fairly.
Not even equitably.
Yes.
Fairly.
Yes. I thank you for that guidance, and I think that it makes my point better. There is one controversial position I have held about tax, and I think I've already been controversial enough for one morning. But I have always felt that we are getting into a time and an age in this country where some of the estates of deceased citizens are so large, that they ought to be taxed. I know it's a very unpopular view, but when you read of billions of shillings in estates, and we could put a limit. We could say we start with 20 billion. We would still be, that would still be many estates, and there is a way of raising funding that way. I know it is not popular, and I will say no more about it. My learned friend and Honorable Omogeni, I don't think I would consider the Mozambique model a successful model. Every time you allow a person to be the appointing authority in respect of a commission that would determine his own fate as a politician, I think you create a temptation. And I want to remind my friend, the Honorable Mugeni, in the beginning at independence, we didn't even have, there was no electoral commission. You remember there was a man called Montgomery. Montgomery was an officer in the AG's office. He was answerable to Charles Jonjo. So Charles Jonjo conducted the elections through Montgomery. Then when Montgomery left, a gentleman, I think from the highlands, called Nyarango. Yeah, Nyarango. Nyarango. He became the commissioner of elections, and life went on. The clamor to create a commission came because the capriciousness of that process under one person answering to the Attorney General became apparent. So the commission was institutionalized to deal with that. So I would not like politicians to have a direct say on who becomes the umpire, the referee of the competition in which they are participating. Now, then you ask me, and I don't have the right answer. So what do you want us to do? Ask Pricewaterhouse to do it, or a consulting firm to do it? I'm not sure that is also correct. I think the way we are doing it, the model we have, conceptually is the correct model. To build into it safety valves is the challenge, and I don't have the answer. I think I seem to have... No. Oh, this would be terrible if I didn't deal with the lady's, Honorable Bilianga's comments. Let me assure you, I have saved the best for last. If we increase the number of constituencies, now, and we go back to our conundrum, if we increased Parliament to 500 members, we will double expenditure and we will need to tax more. And our basic problem then will be multiplied. I think what we should do is to reduce the number of seats and then guarantee women 50% of those seats. That is less problematic. And I don't want to say anything about Parliament, about the Senate. I think the Senate is of a reasonable size. I think the Senate is of a reasonable size. And this problem, if we call it the problem of the gender problem, you can see how problematic it can be when you look at the counties. Because then down there, the top up to achieve the required proportions can result in a really bloated assembly. So I would like to stop there, Mr. Chairman.
As we have to thank you for those observations. And you know, Prof, I came in the tail end of your presentation, so I now must moderate my compliments, if you allow me.
Yes.
Because I may not necessarily agree with everything you've said, particularly on the issue of taxation. That's why I referred you to Article 201 and fair taxation. Today, our policemen are actually having a negative payslip. On the one hand, something was added to them, and then the take-away package is minus. I don't even know if we are now taking them to Haiti, what the whole thing would mean. And of course, on Haiti, I would opine that these things should really first go to Parliament. That, I think, is how ideally should be. That's not for our discussion. But, you know, you were on record. I hope you pronounce yourself on that, Prof, that during the last presidential election, were you amicus or you actually on one side? That would have been very important, because coming out as strongly as you do on the outcome, the pronounced outcome by the highest court in the land, and the subsequent clamor for these things, including what Omgen was saying, really, I think is important. Now, Mozambique, as we all know, was basically a country that went through serious struggle. And even now it is actually under threat of religious insurgency in the north. And you know the main players, Frelimo and Renamo, the political reality at the time meant that the leaders of those two political formations, a country coming out of conflict, and this country actually had to help Mozambique specifically in some of those areas. You may remember the role of Bethel Kiplagat, the late Bethel Kiplagat played in trying to assist the people of Mozambique. To opine is what you're calling mitigated disaster of IPPG is what actually delivered, because when you have two strong appointing authorities and they're sitting at the level of a commission, then clearly the balance of terror, if you like, is what will deliver results, and that's what happened in 2002. I don't think we need to belabor the point, but we hear you, and I personally have the highest of esteem for you, Prof, and continue being close. If you can add your reflections and give us something in writing, it will be very useful for us. Thank you.
I'll try to do that, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think Amnesty International is the next group.
Good to see you, Amnesty International. Wanairungo and team. I think that my co-chair has just slipped out. Karibuni sana.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So perhaps we could begin with some quick introductions. I'm sure you by now know a lot of these committee members. We have nearer you there, Senator Omugeni, Senator of Nyamira and a committee member, and Honorable Eugene Wamalwa is a party leader and a committee member. Honorable Wandai is a committee member and deputy minority leader in Parliament, in the National Assembly. Our sister Catherine Obilianga is a member of this committee and countryman rep from doing it a second term. She's doing her second term, so fairly senior in party organization and also in Parliament. So the other members will be coming. We took a decision that during these stakeholder consultations, we don't have to strictly apply the our own rules with regard to quorum. So I think you should continue in the interest of time, and therefore over to you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Kalonzo Musyoka. I am Irungo Houghton. I serve as Amnesty International Kenya's Executive Director, and with me on my left is Ramadan Rajab, Senior Campaign Officer on issues of civic freedoms and civil liberties. And on my right is our researcher, our country researcher, Benta Moige. We start by really extending our best wishes to this process, to the committee, and also our gratitude for the opportunity to come before you and to speak on a singular issue, noting that there may be many issues that we could engage you on. To the members of the committee, allow us to just frame who you are for us, which essentially is the custodians of the Constitution at this time. Much of the discussions that you will have leave us with no doubt that on your shoulders lie several of our constitutional freedoms and the fundamental rights that are in our Constitution. And your wisdom at a time like this can actually take the country several steps forward or plunge us back to the chaos that we saw in the earlier part of the year. Allow me to address a single issue, which is security sector reform and policing. As you are all no doubt aware, and several of you I've worked with as far back as the post-election violence, the issue of security sector reform, peace and stability has been a troubled culture for us for many years. With the 2010 Constitution, we saw a massive step forward in terms of the separation of investigations, prosecution and judicial processes. We also saw the establishment of an independent policing service, and that service was pronounced as a service and not as a police force that came to our shores as a colonial occupying institution several years before that. We will address ourselves to the issues that we have shared in our memo of September the 7th, and I do hope that members of the committee have got them. The press has sensationalized the budget for this committee, so we have brought extra copies for the committee just in case those sensational allegations are true. So I'll invite Bente if you can just circulate the documentation that forms the basis of our intervention this morning. It is opportune, perhaps, that we are now looking at the issue of our police service being exported to Haiti, and the issue of the quality of the policing.
You must have heard me, Mr. Irungu, before you... so continue, please continue.
Okay, sorry.
Just ignore the chair's intervention and proceed.
The possibility of 1,000 police officers traveling to Haiti within a few months brings the presentation that we're about to make into, I think, an important moment. That we should be discussing the quality of our policing and the accountability of the policing at a time like this is critical. As those officers go to Haiti, the international world, the international attention will be on Kenyan police officers. We also, as Amnesty, would caution that they are going into a very volatile situation, and that as much as we are concerned about the quality of policing at this point, it is also important that we note that they need to be kept safe. So it is in that context that we will make the following points and recommendations. It is sad in some ways that the contingent of police were not being deployed in 2022, because in that year we saw what was probably the best example of what it is like to have a police service that can maintain law and order during elections. With a number of human rights organizations, tens of dialogues and workshops were developed between community leaders, human rights defenders, and police officers, including commanding officers throughout the country, to ensure that there would be dialogue and that there would be community policing approach to the electoral process. And as we all know, it was probably one of the most peaceful of the elections. The question we have to ask ourselves is why 1 year later have we seen such violence, such brutality, and such a level of denialism on the part of the security services and, to some extent, Harambee House. We, as Amnesty International, with several agencies, including Human Rights Watch, the Kenya Medical Association, the Law Society of Kenya, conducted 3 empirical missions to investigate the quality of policing during the phase that we now call Mandamano. And I would like to just give you a couple of the findings from those 2 reports. The first report was released on May the 31st, and essentially was a statement following interviews with about 115 witnesses and victims in that period, March to April. The second second report was done and released to the country on August the 4th. And this was a more in-depth study that essentially looked at what had happened in Kisumu and Migori primarily, but also in some of the other areas. These two reports are before you as the committee, and what we found in the two reports was that 5 fundamental constitutional freedoms were violated over the last 6 months. The first is the right to life, Article 26 of the Constitution, Article 37 of the Constitution, the right to peaceful assembly, Article 36 of the Constitution, the right to association, and Article 33 of the Constitution, the freedom of expression, and lastly, the right to a fair trial. 60 days after the first round of protests, that was in March, based on our interviews with 115 witnesses, we found that there had been excessive and unnecessary use of force, particularly lethal individuals. Most of the people who were killed were bystanders. They claimed not to be part of the demonstrations, and they were unarmed. Most of them were young, between the ages of 20 and 30, and most of them, at least half of them, had died as a result of gunshot wounds. We listened to the testimony of the mother of Precious Kimunto, a 4-month-old Kibera infant who was tear-gassed in her home and suffocated to death on March the 30th. Many of us watched in horror as tear gas was thrown into schools, leading to an entire school being evacuated, an entire class being evacuated and taken to hospital because they had inhaled tear gas of substances that we, as far as we know, we do not have a sense of how safe they were to use on minors. Towards the end of July, we traveled to Migori and to Kisumu. We spoke to county government officials. We spoke to police officers, prosecutors. We spoke also to medical doctors, journalists, survivors, and families of victims. And we heard that there had been 107 cases of assault. Many of those cases, again, 47 of them were cases that had seen gunshot wounds, and in many cases, these gunshot wounds had left people either very seriously injured or dead. We, with our own eyes, verified the deaths of 11 individuals at the referral hospital. Most of them were male, and most of them were between the ages of 17 and 38. We listened to medical practitioners, doctors, who said that police officers chased protesters and bystanders into the referral hospital and threw tear gas into the hospital, leading to tear gas going into the hospital wards. We had journalists who were unable to cover the stories because they were being attacked either by police officers or by protesters. We had medical doctors and medical health practitioners who could not reach places of medical facilities because they could not access and get through the violence that took place. In many ways, the experience we have had over the last 6 months are probably the worst violence we have seen for several years, possibly since 2017. Therefore, we have a number of recommendations, 5 to be specific. The first is that in the spirit of the bipartisan committee that has been set up, to lay rest the denialism that we have seen, most sensationally by the Inspector General, that bodies had been imported into the referral hospital, into the mortuary, for the purposes of the media. We would require you, humbly ask you to essentially do joint fact-finding missions to places like Nyanza, places like Nairobi and Mombasa, And we as Amnesty, with the Missing Voices Alliance and other organizations, would be very happy to facilitate, to organize those trips so that you are able to very quickly determine independently what actually happened over this period. The second recommendation is that you require the Inspector General of the National Police Service as the lead commander of our 100,000 officers and the lead commander of the troops that will go to Haiti and will be covered on national and international television. I think we have to brace ourselves for seeing Kenyan police officers on CNN, on Voice of America, and various other international media to come before the committee. And we would request the following line of inquiry. The first is that the IG commits to not shield his officers from legal processes that would have the officers responsible for the violence that we saw over the last 6 months be brought before a court of law. Secondly, that there be a commitment to desist from the use of non-uniformed officers. And in fact, as Amnesty, we have tried to get, I guess, a response from the police service on what is the policy with regards to informers and undercover police officers in times of protest and in moments when Kenyans are lawfully seeking to protest and to assemble. One of the things we were told by several journalists and medical officers was that the use of non-uniformed police officers and the embedding of police officers among journalists, among protesters, and even among medical practitioners, if you remember the viral clip of police officers climbing out of an ambulance, is that it put our doctors, our nurses, and our journalists in harm's way. The third line of inquiry is essentially that schools, places of learning, medical centers have to be off limits to police officers. I'm sure there will be agreement from the Kenya Medical Association, from the Kenya National Union of Teachers, from the head teachers associations, that in a time when there is tension and there is violence, police officers should not be entering our schools and our medical centers with live ammunition and batons and tear gas. And the last one, essentially, is that we must have safe passage for emergency health workers and journalists at times when there is turmoil. The third recommendation relates to the two principal actors that are responsible for investigations and prosecutions. We would ask the committee to request of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority to clarify how many of the 107 cases that were documented in July have actually moved to prosecution. How many of the cases that involve the lethal use of force and the death of both civilians and police officers, how many of those cases have been taken to a court of law? And I think on the second part, obviously the preserve of the prosecution arm of our government is the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Fourthly, and I'm coming to the last recommendation, that the Ministry of Interior be requested to explain why do we still have a delay of 5 years since the National Assembly passed the Prevention of Torture Act and the National Coroner Service Act, and why aren't those two laws being implemented with the alacrity that is required in order to keep Kenyans safe. It may be opportune at this point, particularly in terms of the last 6 months, and in terms of our officers going abroad to protect Haitians, for a national police conference to be organized. There have been several of these in the past. Under the previous administration, one of the important open door policies that they had was essentially accessibility. And I can speak with confidence and experience that I was able to get through to the Cabinet Secretary, to the Principal Secretary, to various arms of the Interior Ministry with the capacity that we would be listened to, and not always did they act on our recommendations or our advice, but at least we had access. We were also able to make memoranda to the policing conference, and some of the reforms that have come with regards to the condition of police officers has really come as a result of the interventions of Amnesty and several other organizations like IMBLU, like Haki Africa and others. So it is a time like this that we need policy dialogue on this issue. Let me turn to the last issue, which is somewhat out of the realm of the policing environment that we have had up to now, but is extremely important. The incidences of enforced disappearances are returning. The use of special squads are beginning to lead us to concern that we are going to start seeing more people disappearing under this administration. His Excellency the President gave a public assurance to this nation that his government would not be a government of the shadows. It would not be a government that would not remain within the rule of law. And I think one of the concerns that we have is that we are starting to see a return to the kind of situation we saw in Yala. Allow me to bring up one incident just to illustrate how dangerous this is. 3 months before the elections, 2 Indian contractors disappeared with a Kenyan driver. They were members of the campaign team for the Kenya Kwanza campaign, and those 2 contractors disappeared into the thick of the night. They were captured on CCTV camera, we know this. Police officers have been able to track down the actual police officers that stopped their vehicle. And up to now, that case has not progressed. Why? Because we have a lacuna in our law, which says that if you cannot find the bodies of people who have disappeared, then that legal process is almost in jeopardy from the onset. I think the Kenya Kwanza national government requires itself to find a way, not just in the memory of those 2 Indian contractors, but in the spirit and in the protection of all people who have disappeared, all the families of the people who have disappeared, to find a legal framework that ensures that enforced disappearances are not a part of our national culture. I would like to stop there, knowing that the committee may have questions or comments, and as always, as Amnesty, we come in good faith, based on evidence, and with a hope to find a bridge between what offends our constitution and the way forward. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies.
Well, we thank you, Bwana Irungu, for clarity of presentation and thought, and the concerns you have as Amnesty, which indeed are concerns shared by a lot of Kenyans who would want to have a peaceful country. I hope you'll be able to we propose that you take the comments that colleagues here may want to put across to you, and then you can respond at the end of those comments or questions. The first one is this Haiti thing. It's not within our province as such, but a matter like this, I think, will require approval of the UN Security Council. And when I saw President Biden addressing the session at General Assembly, he was saying that should be expedited. I don't know whether anybody will know, have not since followed, whether UN Security Council approval has been given. And the other point I say, an assignment as grave as this would need, I think, approval of a National Assembly and the Senate. I think it is in our law. But, you know, the work of Amnesty International is very well known, and you have, Mr. Rungu, been vocal. I've watched you on national television, and I wish that we could have Kenyans of strong conscience as Amnesty, and you, Mr. Rungu, on this, calling it as it is. We are a little shy as a committee because we're trying to promote national dialogue and conversations. The very weighty matter of police brutality, excessive use of force, use of live bullets. I think I've myself been on record as saying this goes beyond the work of this committee. But having said that, I can be overruled if colleagues indeed, and I thank you for volunteering even to support a fact-finding mission to establish further truth. EPOA were here yesterday, and they did, I think, say quite a bit, a lot of which is even in the print media today. So, friends, karibuni, let's hear what comments we may have. I think the first to go is Eugene, Honorable Eugene, and then a human rights crusader who sometimes gets confused. Light note, Hassan Omar.
Thank you very much, Nairung, with your team. And we want to thank you also for the good work that you are doing. Human rights are universal, and we believe, given one of the most progressive constitutions that we have in this country, we wanted to see our police transformed from a police force to a police service. And our constitution is very clear in terms of professionalism, in terms of respect for human rights, and integrity of our officers. But what happened in this country after the elections, the levels of police brutality is very worrying. Some of us on this table are victims of police brutality during these protests. And our constitution under Article 37 gives every Kenyan the right to demonstrate, to picket, unarmed and peacefully to do so. But we have a situation where the police is actually criminalizing protests. It's a very worrying situation where you are told, oh, today we'll allow you to picket or demonstrate here in Nairobi. Tomorrow we'll not allow you in Kisumu, we'll not allow you, they would allow in Eldoret. I gave the example of the Finland scandal, where parents came out, they were allowed to protest. In Kericho, we had these tea picking machines. Farmers were allowed to protest. But here in Nairobi, the police brutality was serious. I'm looking at your report, and you are giving figures. I think you've talked of 94. You've also talked of 44. When IPOA was before us, they talked of 57 killed by the police. And some were killed by bludgeoning, where the police broke into estates, pulled out people from their houses, and bludgeoned them to death. I buried two of the Nyalenda brothers, Brian and William, very young boys, and it was a very, very sad story. You've referred us to Precious Kemunto, a little baby with a mother in her home, where police break in and throw tear gas in residential areas, and the poor baby suffocated to death. But the majority of the deaths, from what we witnessed, were actually from police bullets. Most of those killed were young fellows, 18 to 30. The bullet wounds, when we looked at the postmortem reports, the death certificates, were from bullets from behind, in the back. Some were shot in the head, running away from the police. Our laws require use of firearms in the prescribed way, where the police are either threatened or they are saving lives. But in the case of where police shoot innocent citizens who are unarmed, I think it's a very worrying thing, and we wanted to know from you in terms of what His Excellency Kalonzo has said. There is this concern, not just nationally but internationally, of the Kenyan police who have this year shown very serious disregard for human rights, going outside our borders, 1,000 of them going to Haiti, Of course, it's a matter that we are hoping our parliamentarians will take up so that it is properly debated. Whether we should be a country sending our young men in harm's way when there are neighboring countries there that have refused to do so for good reasons. And these are some of the things that we are looking at in terms of the reforms. IPOA had very specific, apart from your recommendations, shielding of officers who have misused their firearms to take innocent lives. These firearms, the ballistics, being handled through the forensic lab that is under the DCI, and the DCI is part of the National Police Service. They are proposing an independent institution to handle that so that evidence is not compromised. The police do not protect their own. Because there's a Ugandan saying that a monkey cannot decide the affairs of the forest. It's very likely that the police can protect each other. So that many cases are compromised and the police have not been held to account for the brutality they have committed. I don't know what you think about those recommendations, apart from your 5 recommendations that you've given. Thank you.
Thank you. Hassan.
Just as a note, as we oppose the deployment of our police service into Haiti, I'll ask us ourselves as politicians and members to be very careful not to set the ground for very hostile reception. Because what we have been doing, some of us here, is to link the abuses we allege here as probably the conduct of these police officers on arrival at Haiti. We are carelessly putting them into harm's way. Once our men and women in uniform are out of this country, whether we agree with the process or not, the least we owe them is some levels of discipline in how we refer to them, so that as we debate the issues, provide for their security, provide for their training, or oppose the issues, I think we must not equate our political biases into putting them into harm's way. So we must be very restrained, because I'm seeing a situation, if some of these utterances, which have come from this committee severally, go viral. I'm told some of those groups are armed. You could be preparing for a very unnecessary contest. It's not going to be a blind mission. I'm not at liberty also to discuss it, but it's not going to be a blind mission. It's going to be done in a manner that the safety and security of our officers will be guaranteed. The government of Kenya is not led by fools. They will make it appear like we will just take 1,000 men and women and just put them there for sacrifice. Number 2, I never speak this way, but sometimes I would hope for you also to interrogate some of these demonstrations in a manner, because today I'm talking to peers in the human rights fraternity. They know that I wrote the Charter on Human Rights in the lead up to our elections. We said our first pillar is implementation of the Constitution. And you saw the directives of the President upon election as President of the Republic of Kenya. How is it possible, and be fair, that a demonstration or demonstrators are carrying weapons? Not necessarily ballistic weapons like guns, but they are carrying stones and machetes. These guys prepare themselves. I was there. I know what these demos are. I planned them. I know what we tell each other. Go burn these tires here. Sijui mtu fulani ndo ataongoza pale, yule ataongoza pale. And half the time there is a confrontation between the police. Yes, maybe sometimes the force used is disproportionate, but even where these demonstrations have been left to go on, we have seen, even the time when they said, let them demonstrate. Shops have been looted. Infrastructure has been vandalized. We need to have a real conversation about these issues. And then tell our friends, when they go to a demonstration, you cannot use constitutional means to to achieve unconstitutional objectives. But purporting to take oath that this is the time for a revolution under the guise of Article 37 is not the intent of Article 37. Number three, the Constitution has more than one Article 37. It has the sovereign rights, it has other articles of the Constitution, the right to vote, the respect for institutions of the state, including the Supreme Court when it speaks itself. I was very surprised. One of the civil society organizations which monitored the elections told me, hey, this election was free and fair. You guys actually beat this other team. A few months later, he tells me, oh, you know, if there's an allegation by one party, then it needs to be dispensed of. And I'm thinking to myself, on what basis? So even, I'm not saying, even the neutrality of civil society in terms of how it anchors itself in the new discourse, will speak very much to how civil society is then able to navigate the new terrain. Gone are the days when you'll just go to an international community actor and tell them the UDA government or the Kenya Kwanza government is a dictator government. These are men and women we also engage. Those representatives also have the intelligence agencies. They also have the information. I've come to realize, actually, the reason sometimes government is always on the back foot is because when you're in government, always you are expected to talk less, and even what you have, you reveal as a very measured way. But I can tell you, if you go and get part of the documentation and some of the information that even our counterparts have, that's why sometimes you see their responses are measured. There was a time they will say, in no uncertain terms, that this was wrong. But they understand the design to try and precipitate a crisis so that you divert the country's attention from the economics and try to brand the KK government as a dictatorship. That is not true. And I think those are the kind of things that, as we prosecute in the new discourse, you have friends in this government, they engage at various levels, and I can tell you without a doubt, sometimes we even ask very hard questions internally. I am not sure whether that evidence is some of it, the credibility to it, but I'll finalize by one thing, and Rajab there can bear me witness. We were defending some terrorism suspects. Unfortunately, these terrorism suspects were arrested alongside one of the human rights defenders. When they were in custody, the revelations they made, when this man was released, he told us some of the things are actually true. How they would transport ballistic missiles, how they would organize, how they would get, you remember those testimonies, how they would get firearms from our neighbors. And when Kamwende told us, we just didn't believe him because we thought it was Kamwende. So Kamwende is lying to us. He is concocting stories. But trust me, at many of these scenes and some of these organizational frameworks for this latest wave of demonstrations, why are people talking about burning tires and carrying this and these guys to barricade these ones and these ones to stone cars that are going to work? And this information sometimes is available to the security agencies. And they also have a DTP, the duty to protect other Kenyans. I do agree where there is excessive use of force, where there is unjustified executions, then those have to be dealt with within the purview of law. But talk to our friends that demonstrations cannot achieve the ends that the elections cannot achieve.
Well, thank you, Omar. I think we'll hear one day. Did you want to say something, Co-Chair?
You can go first.
Yes, let me say this and start from where my friend Omar has left. Demonstrations, of course, are a way of expressing oneself and properly guaranteed under the Constitution and enabling laws. There's no doubt, really, regardless of the objective. But let me ask you, in your investigations, and I want to agree with you, because actually what you said here corroborates to a very large extent the testimony of a government agency, IPOA, which were before us here yesterday, and they were seated there. Your evidence corroborates their testimony to a very large extent. But let me ask you, because we need to remain as objective as possible. In your investigations, did you come across evidence that the police killings, which have been documented, were a reaction to threats posed by the demonstrators, either the police themselves or any other citizens? Okay? And even in those circumstances, was the use of lethal force, including live bullets, justified? I want to ask another question, and very, very briefly. In your research, I'm sure you do research a lot, and you do in comparable jurisdictions. Under what circumstances can the police service deploy persons who are not uniformed and carrying military-style guns, actually assault rifles, not uniformed, carrying assault rifles, not wearing any protective gear, okay, to face demonstrators or a mob or a rioting mob? What would be the intention of such deployment if not to kill the mob? I hope you get me. That you are not uniformed, which means nobody can recognize you as a police officer. You are not having any protective gear, which means don't fear. You are not scared of any possible assault. And you are deployed into a crowd, which is charged. Okay? Finally, and I posed this question yesterday to IPOA, and they agreed that indeed it is possible for a private entity or person to undertake private prosecution. And this is clear, it's implicit under Article 157 of the Constitution. 157.6, the director of the DPP, rather, shall exercise state powers of prosecution and may, among other things, at B, take over and continue any criminal proceedings commenced in any court that have been instituted or undertaken by another person or authority, and so on and so forth. Of course, this implies that another person or authority other than the DPP can institute private prosecution. Because the case we faced yesterday was that the IPOA has forwarded numerous files against specific police officers whom they accuse of killing Kenyans during demonstrations, and yet those files are still lying at the DPP. Nobody knows what became of them, and nobody for sure knows when they shall ever be released or be acted upon. Is it possible that Amnesty International and related organizations or persons can exercise the right under the Constitution and the law to institute private prosecution against these culpable police officers? Thank you. I'll stop it at that.
Maybe just to say something, my name is Catherine. The demonstrators, as much as they have the right to demonstrate, let them keep off from school zones and know that the children have their right. That's what I wanted to say.
Yes.
Just the demonstrators or the police, because police also tear gassed innocent kids in school, in Westlands actually.
That's a very valid point.
It's very, very specific.
Let us keep
the demonstrators.
Police off school areas. Demonstrators also must keep off school areas.
Thank you,
And even
Bwana
presidential
Irungu Houghton with your Amnesty International, and we thank you for the good work you're doing. At times, I like us to speak for posterity, because Hassan Omar was chair of the Human Rights Commission. At the same time, I was chair of LSK. And when you speak for human rights, it's always good to speak that you would be on this other side. And I remember one time Ahmed Nasir told us as a Muslim, Islam dislikes people are dishonest, people are deceptive, people who tell lies. They like honest. So I'm sure all of us here want to have an honest discourse. The point I've picked, which I think is a problem, you have said that there's a problem in prosecuting police officers who engage in police brutality and in violence against innocent people, including, I hope, these two innocent kids who were killed in the hands of police. And we need to get a solution because we need accountability. What we are discussing here is about governance. We need accountability. Now that it seems the police will always be out there to shield their own, would you maybe propose that we need to look for another different legal mechanism? Because it seems from the report you have given us, it seems the police will never prosecute their own. And that's what Ipoa told us yesterday. In the US, they have what they call an independent counsel. If you want to prosecute somebody in Congress, you will get an independent counsel. The Attorney General will propose, the High Court will confirm the appointment, then an independent counsel will go and investigate maybe a congressperson or a sitting president or somebody high level in government, knowing that, today that side will be in government, tomorrow they may not. In Zambia, you saw what Lungu did to Echilemi Akainde. This week, Echilemi Akainde is telling Lungu, these jokes you do on Saturday, that is politics, I'll come after you. This keep changing. Now Echilemi Akainde is telling Lungu, don't joke. In last elections, supporters of Echilemi Akainde were tear gassed. One guy was shot outside a police station. So we want to do this for posterity. Would you support a proposal that we create an office of independent counsel so that if there is an allegation, even today it could be me, tomorrow it could be Honorable Mbarire, of police brutality, we don't leave it to be in the hands of the police, but we get somebody independent to do the investigation and prosecution so that we bring an end to what you call impunity within the police force. I just wanted to get your take on that particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Maybe, Mr. Irungu, let me begin by associating myself largely with the sentiments of Senator Omar regarding the deployment of officers in Haiti, because that's a matter that's really not in the realm of this committee, and we need to exercise caution, as Senator Omar said, so that we don't put our men and women in uniform in harm's way wherever they serve us, because they are all our children, they are Kenyans like ourselves, and we owe them that duty of care in whatever we say. But you appreciate, Houston, there is also a very thin line between protecting the rights of demonstrators, and in that case, demonstrators who are not doing so peaceably and unarmed, as is stipulated in our Constitution and our laws, and also the duty by policemen to protect life and property of those who are not otherwise involved in violent protests. I want to believe part of the reason we are here as a dialogue committee, as His Excellency keeps reminding us, is so that we are able to dialogue as a country, to put behind our nation the culture of violence, and where we settle political disagreements using violence. And from where you sit as human rights crusaders and activists, you then owe the country a duty of civic education. That, and I have seen players in the civil society demonstrate over the cost of living peaceably and unarmed, not with machetes, not with stones, and they do so, and the police actually escort them, even to the gates of Parliament. I have seen them even chain themselves to the gates of Parliament, peaceably. I don't know what your role would be as a civil society players and more so human rights activists to protect the rights of even officers and other Kenyans who are not involved in the violence. And probably also engage Kenyans in a crusade of civic education where you educate Kenyans that a demonstration, a procession, a protest, picketing does not necessarily mean a campaign of violence and anarchy. Because when we get into a campaign of violence and anarchy, then you leave the police in a catch-22 position where police officers have to protect another Kenyan's supermarket being looted, and the people looting have machetes, are armed with stones, they have broken into a supermarket, you lobby tear gas, they do not respond, they continue looting and threaten the police. Therefore, there has to be that balance, and we must appreciate that balance. Two, nobody in this country would advocate for excessive use of force, because as Senator Mugeni says, today it's Opio and I, tomorrow it's me. And trust me, I have been there, I know. Those two young Indians you refer to and their taxi driver are people I knew, are people I worked with. There was no reason, absolutely no reason for those young Indians and the Kenyans who were killed by the people, as you say, who are known. Therefore, as we speak about Kenyans who were killed in the demonstrations, let us not forget those Kenyans who were executed in the name of politics. Those young Indians were executed in the name of politics for no reason at all. And not just those because they were Kenya Kwanza. There are many Kenyans. And Irungu, you remember the bodies that were fished out of River Yala, simply because of their political beliefs. People we knew. Therefore, as we speak, and I speak this with a very heavy heart, because we lost so many people that worked with us in the last campaign because of what they believed in politically. And we had their bodies in River Yala, some in River Tana, others in the Abadeas. Those young Indians, you have rightly said, the officers are known, but they cannot be prosecuted because the bodies have never been found. But therein brings me to my question, Mr. Irungu and your colleagues in the human rights world. Tomorrow, and Omar Hassan also did point out to the incident where they were advocating for the rights of people who are being accused of financing or engaging in terrorism. And you have a duty to defend their rights. Tomorrow, I am almost certain, if those officers were charged in court, of course, the lawyers in the room will rush to represent them. But also human rights crusaders will be there speaking about their rights, knowing very well that these are the people who participated in these extrajudicial killings. You've also spoken about the right of passage, and I agree with you wholly. The right of passage, especially of medical personnel, of journalists when during demonstrations, You've spoken about the police lobbing tear gas in schools, in hospitals, but you're also aware there were incidents where youth, again, were getting tear gas canisters lobbed at them to disperse them. They get hold of the tear gas canisters and hurl them back in private institutions, in schools, in hospitals, to create a situation of anarchy. Therefore, maybe I don't know what you would do, and I have no solution myself as to what you would do as human rights crusaders to ensure that when people claim to be peaceably and unarmed to be demonstrating, then they also do so in designated places. Your rights end where mine begin. It is so said. Why would anyone stop another Kenyan from going to work because they want to protest? Why don't we have a country where we are decent, where we are civilized, that if we're having a demonstration on the cost of living, we do not have to pull down the entire infrastructure on the expressway in the name of protesting, that we can peaceably and unarmed gather at a designated point, protest, and say all the manner of things we want to say against whoever we want to say against. Then peaceably go home in the evening. And I don't know, I have no solution. It's just probably more of comments. I don't know if there's anyone else with something else before we close. Maybe if not, we can close at that, and Nirungu can answer those ones.
Thank you very much. And I now know why I was looking forward to this engagement, because the questions have been clear and direct, and I thank you all for the frankness and the courteous way that you have responded to our presentation. The points that have been raised fall into 7. Allow me just to quickly deal with them. Haiti, and I will exercise I will exercise a bit of judiciousness in terms of response based on Honorable Hassan's comment. The issue of data and verifiable data. Thirdly, the issue of policing approaches during assembly, private prosecution, legal reform, civic education, and criminalizing disappearances. And I'll try and be propositional on all of those issues. Allow me, first of all, just say, Your Excellency, thank you for the kind words at the beginning. May God and government keep me safe, keep Amnesty safe, keep all human rights organizations safe, and indeed all of you, and 50 million Kenyans. I mean, that is the spirit, I think, that our constitution is drafted. On the issue of Haiti, and it is a weighty matter, allow me just to say 2 or 3 things as the process begins to unfold. And of course, one is the UN Security Council, and the second is our own very own National Assembly. As Amnesty International, we believe that there has to be clear and mandatory enforceable parameters for the mission. What those will take is obviously a matter of experts. We need to make sure that there will be no excessive force, there will be no corruption, and secondly, there will be no sexist exploitation. The people of Haiti have, as we know, suffered too much. They require a human rights-based policing mission. And I believe that with these procedures, these parameters, and as Amnesty, we can offer any of the authorities ideas on this within a UN framework, it can be done. The second recommendation on Haiti is that there has to be a UN oversight mechanism that ensures that Haitians have access to issues of accountability, to access to justice and redress where there may be excesses. And I think this would be very important. We would also say, given our own experience, that we would invite the National Assembly to ensure and require that all commanders, not just the topmost commander, of whom we have respect as Amnesty International, that all commanders are assessed on the basis of their ability to de-escalate situations. Let me turn to the second part of the second question, which relates to the data. there will be some difference in data, Honorable Omangeni. I think it is very difficult, as many people know, to be able to have one verified source on a moment as intense as the demonstrations that we had. Our data is verified. We can say behind every one of those statistics that we have verified those numbers, and indeed I believe the IPOA, who came before you yesterday, could probably do the same thing. We would probably, I guess, focus, respond to some of the questions that are raised around the what broke down in terms of policing over this period. And it is gratifying, I guess, for the co-chair, Honorable Kimani, who says that nobody will challenge the constitutional principle. Allow us to also say that we respect the uniform. We respect the oath of office that police undertake, and most of the 100,000 police officers are not going to be held liable for the violence that we saw over the last 6 months. But I think there are a number of things we need to point out. On the basis of our own research, what we realized is that the crisis started at the point that the police refused to accept notifications, that they began to intimidate and arrest organizers, and wherever protesters gathered non-violently, they dispersed them with tear gas, rubber bullets, and as the months continued, live weapons. There was a point, I don't know if you recall, in July, when it was actually very difficult to be able to distinguish between bystanders, marshals, protest organizers, uniformed police officers, non-uniformed police officers using military-grade weaponry, looters, criminals. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, based on that experience and in the knowledge that we are a troubled nation economically, and that even if the political class can find a way of setting aside the differences and setting aside the grievances from the past, we are still a troubled nation. There will still be protests and demonstrations. So this is why we say, as Amnesty, it is important that we have a serious national policy review of how we police assemblies. And our recommendation is essentially a national policing conference. And it has helped break through a number of problems that we've seen. Allow me to turn to the recommendation or the suggestion, and I smiled a little bit as the presentations went on, because we thought we were coming to task the committee, but we have received a few tasks on our side, which we gladly pick up. The first is that the Constitution is innocent. The Constitution is the one instrument or the one person that will not be dragged through a court of law as a result of the violence that we've seen in the last 6 months. We would probably argue that the laws are also innocent, with the exception of possibly one. Because we feel that the National Coroner Service Act, which was passed by the National Assembly 5 years ago, gives us the capacity for an independent forensic capacity, for legal capacity, for a operational capacity to hold police officers accountable, to be able to independently assess crimes committed by uniformed officers. And therefore, we probably would not, at this stage, but again, perhaps I can speak with the former Law Society of Kenya chairperson to see how this independent tribunal might be constructed. We would simply say that you have the laws in place. Can we implement them? I think the second area really is to reflect a little bit on the Public Order Act. And I think this is the one area where Honorable Hassan will probably also agree with us, in addition to the other things that he has said this morning, which is we have an archaic Public Order Act. It is so far behind the Constitution that it is out of focus. We would call for its immediate repeal and replacement with clarity, clear legal provisions that do not offend or criminalize protesters, but keep protest lawful and non-violent. And I think, Honorable Kimani, let me just turn to your point, which I think is really important. You know, we spoke to a number of prosecutors and police officers, and many of them requested anonymity. which was a matter of concern for me, because in many ways what we are discussing are national issues. They should be matters that we can debate and take responsibility for our comments. But one of the things that we came away from those conversations was that there is a difference between protesters who destroy property, who assault others, who rape and sexually molest others during these moments of turmoil, and protesters. And the problem is that we are not able, and I say we, I think as an ecosystem, we're not able to distinguish between those categories that I read out earlier. The bystander, the marshal, the uniformed officer, the looter, the criminal, the protester, and the non-uniformed military officer that is not carrying any identification, but is carrying military-grade weapons. And I think what we have to do is we have to begin to distinguish that much more clearly. None of the policing that we saw during this period that we documented had the capacity to distinguish this. In fact, it was almost blurred to a point that we began to think it was deliberate. Because if notifications had been given to protesters from the political parties, if the protesters had been facilitated, given assurance, there had been clarity in terms of the routes of the demonstrations, and there had been recourse when criminals come to hijack those protests, I have a feeling that we would not have de-escalated or rather spiraled in the way that we did. And therefore, I think there is an opportunity going forward, now that our heads are clearer and the violence has hopefully is behind us, for us to be able to do this. Let me lastly turn, I think, to the point that's been raised in terms of civic education and private prosecution. 80% of Amnesty's work is civic education. We spend a lot of time in our schools with young people. We spend a lot of time with families that have experienced human rights violations. And to be honest, that is the best part of our work. It actually pains me to come before the nation with those statements, those press conferences, even to discuss like this, the ugliness that our country is capable of. So I would really look forward to the committee looking at this issue of civic education. For the record, we pushed very hard just before the last elections with the Jubilee administration. And the Jubilee administration, through a note verbal, banned funding by the donor community to the IEBC or to civic organizations to do civic election work. And we said that the most dangerous thing is an election where you have high levels of disinformation, misinformation, a lack of regulation of social media platforms, and algorithms that nobody understands how they work, except the people who pay for them. As we move into a season of artificial intelligence, I know I'm moving slightly far. I think we have to look at the quality of civic education that is available for our people. We are in the moment of a moral hysteria around LGBTIQ persons. Allow me to go there also. There are individuals and constituencies that are deliberately trying to whip up homophobic and hateful comment against people that have committed no law and have not been taken to a court of law. But they would rather that they are beaten, that they are stripped, that they are taken from their homes and their jobs. But let me not stop there for those of you who haven't got quite to the position of care and compassion. We have to think about that baby, that 3-year-old child called Brighton Sagini. And it still burns me, that story. How does a 3-year-old be killed by 3 generations of her family? A grandmother, an uncle, and a cousin. 3 generations conspire to kill a child 15 years before that child had any opportunity to inherit that land. Or perhaps we can go to Shakahola and discuss how is it possible that close to 500 people could have been persuaded by one very charismatic evangelist to kill themselves through starvation. Allow me just to end on a sober note. Our country is ailing. And we must provide the leadership at this time for the country to become respectful of diversity, to be anti-discriminatory in its nature, or we will continue to see violence perpetuated when we have a solid constitution. I've not talked about gender, and I can see Cecilia is asking me, what about misogyny and sexism?